All right, guys, well, welcome back to the next edition of U.S. History with Mr. DeCecco. This section is just not complicated. There's just a lot of little items that lead us up to the Civil War. So today we'll be looking at Civil War, the issues, and the compromise that were made pre-Civil War. So that would be before. Pre-Civil War is before the Civil War. So the biggest question is going to be pretty simply, should slavery be allowed in any of the new territories? You can only imagine what Northerners and Southerners would say. So let's get it going here for you. There are some constitutional debates about slavery, and we can look back to our Constitution to see what it says. So until the Civil War, the Constitution had protected slavery in a couple different ways. The 3/5 Compromise said that slaves are actually not full people. They would count as 3/5 of a person. All right. Second issue was our Constitution did not ban slavery, but they said they would actually stop the importation of any new slaves in 1808. So they would not stop it until then. But after 1808, you cannot bring any more new slaves from Africa, from the Caribbean into America. Not to say that smuggling didn't happen. And there was something, a federal statute known as the Fugitive Slave Law, meaning that if slaves had escaped, it was the duty of American citizens to capture these slaves and then bring them back. So the question is, should slavery or even those laws apply to any of the new territories? Some say yes, some say no. So we'll take a quick look at Northern versus Southern views, okay? Northerners actually wanted to stop the spread of slavery early 1800s. So understand this. They didn't say they're going to get rid of slavery. They're going to stop the spread of slavery. So they use these two arguments, right? And back in the day, 1787, we had this Northwest Land Ordinance. That was a federal law saying that slavery was actually banned in the territory north of the Ohio River. So slavery would be illegal north of the Ohio River. And the next big issue happened in 1820. That was the Missouri Compromise, and it basically said that there would be no slavery north of the 36-degree 30 line that was part of the Louisiana Purchase. So if you need to see a map of that, this is the Northwest Land Ordinance, 1787. So any of these green areas here, this little guy is the Ohio River, and that law said there'd be no slavery north of the Ohio River. So that's the Northwest Land Ordinance. Then you got the Missouri Compromise line, which is right here. Missouri actually will be the exception. Missouri becomes a slave state, but any other territory north, so all of this green over here, will not have slavery. And that was the Missouri Compromise, 1820. Well, what are the Southern views? Southerners sought to spread or expand slavery. They used a couple arguments. They're pretty easy to understand, all right? First of all, they said that our Constitution only applied to white people. Our Constitution had nothing to do with slaves, right? Also, Congress, they felt, Southerners, did not have the authority to prevent the extension of slavery. So if you're a Southerner, you moved out west, they're saying legally I should be able to bring my slaves, right? Also, a Southern viewpoint would be Congress actually had a constitutional duty to protect slavery because slaves were considered to be property. And based on our Constitution, our government should protect our property. So just giving you some of the differences between North and South before the Civil War. Obviously, population was dominated by the North. You could look at the numbers here. It was almost a 2-to-1 advantage. The North had more factories. That's easy to see. The North actually had more railroads, so they could move products or people around, especially when it comes to war, very easily. The North had more money, and the only thing that the South has is they produce more cotton. Well, I mean, think about going into the Civil War. That's really not going to help you win a war. You know what I mean? Guns and bullets and movement of troops is going to help you win a war. A cotton T-shirt's not really going to help you win. So getting closer to the war, the biggest compromise, which kind of leads up to it, is the Compromise of 1850. So if you paid attention in class, you're good on this, but if not, here we go. All right. So until 1850, there was actually an equal number of slave and free states. There were 15 and 15 if you need to know. 15 free states, 15 slave states. The problem with adding California as a free state, it would upset the balance between North and South. So we had to do something to create a compromise to please both North and South. So the issue here is known as the Compromise of 1850, all right? California does enter as a free state. So who's going to be happy there? The North. Second piece of that compromise, orchestrated by Henry Clay, by the way, is the Fugitive Slave Law, which actually required that all escaped slaves be caught and returned back to their owners. Well, who's that going to please? The South. Then the federal government kind of threw their hands up and created something known as the popular sovereignty. And that is, the people living in territories are going to decide if they want a free state or a slave state upon statehood. So really they're just giving it up to the people living in that area to determine that. So there's your compromise of 1850. If you need to see it, here it is. 1850, you had 15 green or non-slave states. You had 15 slave states, and then what's the unbalance now? California is added as a free state, which upsets the balance. The Southerners get a Fugitive Slave Act, and this guy right here, there's your popular sovereignty right down here. So the people of these territories are going to decide if they want slavery or not. So if you want to pause that to do the vocab so you got it on your sheet that I made for you, great. I'm going to keep going so we can keep moving here, all right? The aftermath, what happens? Well, first of all, Northerners don't follow the law. So the law says that slaves have to be caught, brought back to their owners. Northerners are not going to follow that law, right? Interesting book that is published after the Compromise of 1850. Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin. It influenced many to oppose slavery. The anti-slavery movement began to grow in terms of numbers. Sometimes we refer to that as the abolitionist movement, all right? People read the book, they see how bad slavery is, and they're going to oppose that, right? The Compromise of 1850 truly didn't make Northerners or Southerners completely happy. So that sectional discord will continue, and 11 years later, 1861, we're fighting a civil war, okay? There was uncertainty about our future. Almost certainly there was going to be some more conflict between North and South over what issue? I think you can figure that out, over the issue of slavery, right? All right, 1853. The Kansas and Nebraska territory is getting developed, and we have to figure out what kind of states that area is going to become. So in 1820, the Missouri Compromise actually claimed and stated that it prohibited slavery in Kansas and Nebraska. Why? It was over the demarcation line that was created in the 1820 Missouri Compromise. But now we're 34 years later, 32 years later, and our government begins to change things. So Kansas-Nebraska, the Act of 1854, actually changes this. And it states that the area of Kansas and Nebraska will be an area of popular sovereignty. What's that mean? People living there are going to decide if they want slavery or not. So now Kansas and Nebraska is actually open to slavery. All right. There's the line, the 1820 line, that said no slavery above this line, and the rest of the lands left from the Louisiana Purchase. But now the Kansas-Nebraska Act says that the people of these territories are going to decide, what's that called again? Popular sovereignty. So you should know that Kansas-Nebraska Act, and we'll deal with the aftermath as we go. Well, what happens? There's a bunch of people who want slavery who move to Kansas. There's a bunch of anti-slavery people who move to Kansas, and they're fighting each other, they're killing each other, and Kansas gets this nickname, Bleeding Kansas. All right, so I mean, this is 1855, 1856, so people are dying over the issue of slavery even before the Civil War begins in 1861. Okay, pro-slavery mob. So what's pro-slavery? People in favor of slavery are destroying homes and stores and anti-slavery newspapers. John Brown, he's an abolitionist. We're going to slot him in this category over here. He's an anti-slavery guy, John Brown. They killed 5 people at Pottawatomie Creek in the middle of the night, ran to their homes because they were for slavery, pulled the guys out, killed them. John Brown, Pottawatomie Creek. So that's just kind of giving you an idea of what is happening in the Kansas territory. Well, what's the nickname? Bleeding Kansas. I should probably make that red right there, right? Bleeding Kansas. I'll help you, right? So there's a nice little thing. Potawatomi Massacre. Who did it? John Brown, right? 1856. John Brown murdered 5 people. Why? They're in favor of slavery. John Brown is against slavery. Put it together for yourself, all right? So this is violence out in Kansas, but there was also violence in our Senate. So 2 guys you might want to meet here. Preston Brooks from South Carolina. Charles Sumner is from Massachusetts, I believe, from the north, right? Violence erupts in the Senate. What happens? Charles Sumner from Massachusetts gave a speech titled "The Crime Against Kansas." It took 2 days to deliver, so it's a very long speech. He's basically bashing Southerners, slavery's wrong, and he actually insults some Southern congressmen, right? Days later, Preston Brooks from South Carolina walks up to Charles Sumner and beat him over the head with his cane. He sustained severe injuries. He will go to the hospital. Brain trauma. He's going to be out of Congress for a while, kind of, getting healed. So he's in bad shape, right? This is kind of like Southern chivalry, they call it, right? Argument versus clubs. Well, you can talk. This is Charles Sumner. Right? You can talk all day. What's Preston Brooks doing? He's going to beat him with his cane, and Charles Sumner will eventually die from the injuries he sustained from that beating. So that's pretty interesting. And then politically, things begin to change, all right? We have a new political party developing by 1860, and that is the Republican Party. Those reactions, they led to some changes in where? In Congress. So what happened? The Whigs begin to split. That little political party, the anti-Jackson party. Well, why did they split? There's Northern Whigs and Southern Whigs, and the issue that divides them is slavery, right? The Democratic Party was seriously weakened in the North, so we're going to see the rise of the Republican Party seems to be predominantly in the North, whereas the Democratic Party seems to be the dominant party in the South. The new party was founded to oppose the spread of slavery. What is that new political party? Republicans. And basically they're that sectional party where you're going to find them in the North. And a lot of the free soilers joined the Republican Party, and their slogan was what? Free soil, free labor, free men. What's that mean? No slavery. So that's pretty easy. The issue of slavery will also make it to our Supreme Court. So in 1857, Dred Scott is a slave living in slave territory. His master and his family moved to a free territory. He thinks he's free, sues for his freedom. So it ends up in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court actually made a decision. Roger B. Taney was the Chief Justice, and he really ruled on the question of slavery everywhere, in all territories, all states, okay? So what the Dred Scott versus his owner Sanford decision was that slaves are and were property in 1857. Now, no African Americans, slave or free, were citizens. They could not sue in court. They had no business in court, and they're not entitled to constitutional protections. Slaves are what? Property. What's the Constitution say? You could bring your property where? Everywhere, right? So what is the effect? Slavery was legal where? Everywhere. The South is actually dancing in the streets because our federal government protected slavery. You can only imagine how the North feel. The anti-slavery, they're mad. In the anti-slavery movement, actually, instead of going away, it grows stronger because they feel the Supreme Court made a big mistake. I mean, this is pretty bad. They called a person someone's property. Later on, they're going to have to eat that decision and change their mind, right? I'm going to just take a snapshot of what's happening in Illinois here. There's, by the way, there's Dred Scott. Let me go back to him. Yeah, there's Dred Scott, the guy who sued for his freedom. And what did the Supreme Court say about poor Dred Scott? In 1857, the man's not a man, the man is property. All right, so we have to deal with that. Let's deal with some political things. So we're getting pretty close to the Civil War here. Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas were trying to become senator of Illinois. So there's 3 debates that they had to try to win the seat of Senator Illinois. Spoiler alert, Lincoln is going to lose. All right, so what were the issues? Lincoln was the Republican, and he's challenging Stephen Douglas, who is the Democrat, to become the senator of what? Illinois, right? There was a series of debates. There were 3 of them. It really kind of weakened Douglas in the South because he wasn't as strong on slavery as he should have been for those Democrats. He basically said that so the people of the territory should decide. He believed in popular sovereignty, and he kind of danced around the issue. Right? Lincoln became a national political figure because of those debates. It really put him on the map. People knew who he was, and 2 years later, 1860, he will win the presidency. So that they kind of set him up, those Lincoln-Douglas debates. Lincoln became unacceptable in the South. They did not like him. Why? His position was against the extension of slavery. Be very clear on this now. Lincoln never got up there and said, I'm going to get rid of slavery. He was an abolitionist, but he didn't want to alienate the South. So what did he say again? He's against the extension, the expansion, the spread of slavery. He does not say in 1858 he's going to get rid of slavery. All right. The Lincoln-Douglas debates to me are pretty funny. I wish I can go back in time because Douglas, he's a really short, kind of pungent guy, and Lincoln was what? He was huge. So I can just imagine watching his argument between Lincoln, who's so tall, and Stephen Douglas. But I don't think I'll ever be able to go back in time anytime soon, so I can't do it, right? Yeah, there's kind of like, this is in Illinois. You can go see the statue, right? This guy's yelling down at him, and he's yelling up at him. Those are the Lincoln-Douglas debates, all right? So if you need that, it's there for you, the vocab. Lincoln quote, phenomenal. What's he say? He said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. So America, as we are divided among the slavery lines, is not going to make it. So he believes that our government, our country, will be permanently, it cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. So I do not expect the Union to be dissolved, but I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. Either basically we're going to have slavery or not. So it's a great Lincoln quote. Let's see what John Brown again. If you forgot him, John Brown was the guy who killed 5 people at Pottawatomie Creek. So he had this raid on Harpers Ferry, and John Brown was kind of an interesting cat. He's a failure at a bunch of businesses, divorced a bunch of times, but he thought God wanted him to get rid of slavery. So here's what he does in 1859, all right? He led a small group. He had 4 or 5 of his sons with him, a couple freed slaves, about 20 people, and he was going to raid this arsenal in Virginia. Well, what's an arsenal? It is a federal warehouse with a bunch of guns. Where is it located? Down south in Virginia. What's it called? Harpers Ferry. So he's going to go raid it and steal some stuff. Why is he going to do it, right? He wanted to see some weapons and lead a huge uprising. I'm going to go back to this one so you got it. He was going to get a bunch of guns, go down to the first slave house, shoot the owners, pass out the guns to the slaves, then go to the next one, the next one, the next one. And he himself, all by himself, he's going to get rid of slavery. Well, things don't go too well for John Brown. He doesn't make it out of the arsenal. The army surrounds it. He is arrested. He is tried. He's obviously guilty, and he's actually hanged for treason. Once again, treason is going against the government. He becomes an abolitionist hero in the North. Southerners begin to seriously distrust the North, and they begin to arm themselves because if this cuckoo is going to come down there and do that, maybe somebody else will too. So they really want to get ready. So they start to kind of gear up and get ready for a war. That is, by the way, John Brown right there. So that's before the Harpers Ferry. He grew a giant beard and things like that. But I mean, that's kind of John Brown right there. If you don't know what an arsenal is, I gave you the vocab, so you got it. All right. All right, let's deal with the election, 1860, 1 year before the war. The Democratic Party was actually split between Northerners and Southerners. Abraham Lincoln is going to win. He gets a very small percentage of the popular vote, but he actually gets a majority of electoral college votes, so he becomes the first Republican president. South is actually so upset that a man could become the president who wasn't even on the ballot for them. So they decide to get mad. If you want to see the numbers, they're there. This is the states that Lincoln carried. These are the states that the Southern Democratic John Breckinridge carried, and there was a couple guys in the middle here, but Lincoln will become president. Southerners do not feel they should be part of the country anymore, all right? In the midst of all this, Senator John Crittenden comes up with a Crittenden Compromise. Why Crittenden? He's kind of in the middle of the pack. He's in Kentucky, where Henry Clay was from. So he proposes dividing the nation along the Missouri Compromise line all the way to California, slavery beneath it, free states above it, everybody can be happy. But this compromise was never turned into a law. Right, just it does not make it. So it's just here's what he proposed. Doesn't happen, but you should know about it. Right, it's a nice proposal, but it doesn't work. It doesn't become law. Right. Then the last issue, right before the war, we have this thing called secession. All right, what is secession? When a state feels they do not want to be part of the country anymore. So they're going to what's called secede. They're going to leave the country, create their own country, create their own rules, and do whatever they want to do. So after Lincoln gets elected, this is important, the war does not start. So Lincoln gets elected, the Civil War doesn't start. So what happens? Lincoln gets elected, and South Carolina decides to secede, and they do in 1860. Lincoln is elected. The southern states leave, at least South Carolina, and there will be 11 in total that decide to go. Okay, by February 1861, 6 more southern states would join them. So now you got 7 total, and 4 more are going to join after that. So 11 total states decide to leave. They become called the Confederate States of America. They elect our president for the entire country. He didn't really take any action to stop them. He just kind of let it happen. He thought that they would give up and come back. James Buchanan was not a strong leader for us. Lincoln, when he comes in, he claims that those states do not have the right to secede. And he made his views known in his first inaugural address. And we're going to pick up with that as we keep moving. So, what happens? We have the Union and the Confederacy here. And that is, you got your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's your 7 states. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those 4 are going to join after, right? And what happens? The South, especially South Carolina, they begin firing on this fort, which is a federal fort. And by doing that, Lincoln says that they started the war. So if you stay tuned, our next video will be about the Civil War, strategies, weaknesses, and stay tuned, and that one will be coming for you. So hope you enjoyed. Please study. If you need to kind of listen to it again, go ahead. Good luck. We'll see you soon.